Uh, Good morning. It's a great pleasure and honor at the same time to have a chance to talk to Danuț Mănăstirianu, whom I can call a mentor and a teacher. I met Danuț, as I call him, many years ago, probably around 1998, when he came to teach at Emmanuel University in Oradea. I remember the fresh air that he brought to that place, to teaching. For us, it was truly a breath of fresh air, and we always, as students, look forward to his returns and to his courses, because I know you were coming for some time and then leaving. But I'm gonna start and invite him to talk about his own intellectual and spiritual trajectory and journey. What were the important people, books, moments? Please.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure for me to talk to you personally and to the people you try to serve with these kind of interactions. Let me begin with the beginning. I was born in a little brethren family, which was very poor, first generation who came to the city. My grandparents on both sides were the pioneers of the brethren faith in their villages in the 20s in Romania, both of them brethren. I grew up in this family. I spent my first 4 years mostly with my maternal grandparents. And then I moved to the city. I really enjoyed the village and disliked the city profoundly, although I'm a city boy now. I was going to church from my childhood, and when I started high school, I became somewhat disenchanted with the kind of Christianity that was professed in those churches. It was a sort of otherworldly Christianity. There was no concern for the things of this world, you know, the classic saying, "Don't brush the brass on a sinking ship," was not known, but it was a conviction, an inherent conviction in that church. While as a teenager, I was very interested in the things of this world, not in the theological sense, but in the practical, concrete sense. You know, I was interested in political things. I was interested in poverty, in lack of justice, and stuff like that. And my church did not have any interest in this. So when I was in high school, which was really a formative time for me, you know, I was coming from a very low educated environment. My father bought me one book, the rest of my library I bought at the beginning with money, the little money that my parents were giving me for lunch break at school and so on. When I got to high school, I met a lot of people coming from a more intellectually astute environment, and my first access to culture was really snobbishry. So they were interested in you know, fine arts and classic music and stuff like that. So I started, you know, through them getting access to those things, and on this kind of strange way, I started enjoying that. So I collected along the times with whatever money I had, records, and I was going to concerts, fine arts, especially painting albums and stuff like that. And so that was a very formative time for me. That's when I started, when I wrote my first article for the high school journal. And I was extremely disappointed when I saw that the teacher who was in charge of the journal changed completely the sense of my text, because I was writing about the crisis of youth in the world, and he turned it into the crisis, the youth crisis in the capitalist world. For goodness sake, I wasn't doing communist propaganda, but that's how things were. Worked at the time. What happened during that time is that because of my disenchantment with church, and which collided, which sort of happened at the time when my own father was on a sort of a backsliding stage in his life, and we stopped going regularly to church. So I was happy of that, and I became more interested in Marxism. I started reading Hegel, Feuerbach, Lenin, and Marx, and so on and so forth. And slowly, progressively, I became sort of idealist Marxist. Now, I was not a communist, and I never was tempted by communism. My father was listening to Radio Free Europe all the time, and I remember when in '61, I heard on our tiny radio that quasi-communist militant in Congo, Patrice Lumumba, was killed by Belgian, we call them terrorists today, commando and stuff like that. So, and certainly listening to those programs, I was very aware of what kind of communism we have. And I made a difference between the Romanian communism and idealist Marxism and so on. That kind of idealistic phase ended towards the end of high school, just before I turned 18, when a number of things happened that made me analyze my Marxist convictions. First of all, it was a first failed love story with all the intensity that these kind of stories have when you're a 17-year-old teenager. And then I was also faced with a tragic for me realization that I cannot fulfill my professional dream. I was dreaming of becoming a Navy officer. And because I had a problem with my sight, I realized that I cannot fulfill that dream. And these two stories coming together really took me off balance, and I tried to find a solution in Marxism. And I realized that, in fact, although Marxism claims to have a solution for society, it didn't have a solution for me, for my own problems. And then I realized, by logic, that if it doesn't have a solution for me, it can't have a solution for society, because society is not an abstraction, as it's made of people like me and you, and so on. So one night in my despair, I knelt by my bed and I said, God, I don't know if you are there. I don't know what to do with my life. And I heard a voice. I heard a voice, in my inner self saying, you have to serve me. That was the moment of my conversion. And I was never sorry for saying yes to this voice. So I'll stop here, and we can develop from there the rest of the story in the direction that you want.
No, I mean, after this beautiful story, please, continue. I don't want to interrupt it.
Yeah, okay. Since I couldn't go and become a Navy officer, I had to choose a profession. My interests were lying in the area of sociology, psychology, and I started inquiring about this, but I was told clearly in my high school that because in that particular year, which was 1973, the Communist Party passed a decision that for certain disciplines, especially social disciplines like history, philosophy, sociology, and so on, one needed a recommendation from the Youth League Communist Party. I was a member of the Communist League. Yeah, I became a member not because of I had convictions, but simply because, you know, everybody was a member of the Youth League, with very few exceptions. And that didn't mean anything, you know, I just paying my dues, and that was it. But I was told clearly by my professors that given my conversion, which was a public fact, everybody knew I'm a Christian, they told me I will never get the recommendation. So I had to choose something else. So one night, one evening, you know, I said a prayer. I opened the book that, you know, presented different options, and I started going through it. And I got an idea. I went again through it, and then I said, that's what I'm going to do. So I decided to study economics, which was the closest to my social interests that I was allowed to do as a Christian, as an active Christian. So yeah, I passed the exam and I studied economics for 4 years. A number of things happened in parallel with that. So I was converted in 72. I was baptized. I became a member of the Baptist Church, and not really because of dogmatic convictions, but because I found a good group of young people there. In time, I became the youth leader. I was very active, and of course that attracted attention from you know, those who were watching over us. Now, the attention that I started receiving intensified when I was for a year in the army. I was the first generation that had to go in the army before the university. So 73, 74, I went to, you know, to do my military duty. And the first thing that happened to me there was an interrogation with a Securitate officer, the counter information officer there, who told me, we don't need Christian scholars in this country. You will never finish your university studies. You will never get a job, and so on and so forth. So these things continued. It was nightmare. I was, you know, kind of naive teenager, 18, 19-year-old. In fact, when I started, I was still 18. And I was shocked by that. I was prepared, kind of, because I knew, you know, I read things. I wasn't naive from that point of view, but naive in the sense of the extent of the aggression that this can mean. Now, I want to stop here and tell you something that is one of the most fascinating stories of my life. Because during those interrogations, at a certain point, I realized that there is a younger officer that comes in the room. And when he was coming in, soon the Securitate officer would stop the interrogation and let me go. I realized in time, first of all, who that guy was. He was the chief of staff, the second in command in the military base. Although he had his grade in the army was not very high, but he was the best in his generation in the military academy. And when he finished his studies, he asked to be appointed to the worst military base in the Romanian army. So he had a high responsibility as chief of staff, but he did not have a very high grade. And the guy was very respected in the army because he was a man of integrity. And we were laughing to see, you know, superior officers, you know, saluting the flag, like, stunned in his presence, because he was that kind of a, strong guy. But at the same time, a man of integrity, respectful and respected. So, okay, I skip a few decades, and after the fall of communism, after a number of years, about 10, I think, I got access to my secret police files, and I realized that the first documents in my secret police file, which is about 2,000 pages, a very interesting reading. They're all on my blog in Romanian. The interesting thing is that the first documents in my file were from my time in the army. That's when, they documented the interrogations and, people they recruited to inform on me and so on and so forth. So I started publishing the documents on my blog. But because these are documents created by the, as Orwell calls it, the Ministry of Truth, which is the Ministry of Lies, you can't believe everything that is written there. So I didn't want to just publish the Securitate lies. I associated each document with comments, clarifying mistakes they made intentionally or unintentionally, and so on and so forth. Now, with the documents from my time in the army, I had a good opportunity to talk about this officer who, without much noise, was like an angel who protected me from the abuse of that stupid Securitate officer. To my surprise, people who were reading what I was putting on my blog confirmed my view on this officer. His name was Marin Ilie. And they were speaking very highly of him, as a man of integrity. Somebody called him one of the most cultured officer in the Romanian army, a man of integrity, highly respected, and so on. I was pleasantly surprised, of course. And then one Sunday I was preparing to go to church, and the phone rang, the old line with a handle and everything. So I took the handle and I had a voice on the other side saying, "Here is General Marin Ilie. Do you recognize my name?"
Wow.
I was stunned. Believe me, I could see if somebody told me that this guy is going to call me one day, I would have not believed it. And he tells me his story. He says, as we do sometimes, we narcissists, we do a search on the internet after our name to see what the internet says about us. And I found your documents. And he said, I remember you very well. I remember those times. And I'm sorry for what you went through and all that. And I called you to tell you my story. And he said, in a few years, I became the commander of that military base. And I grew, on the military profession in grades and all that. And I soon became the commander of the 3rd Romanian Army based in Craiova. And, and I was one of the most important people in the city. And from time to time, we'd meet with the head of the Communist Party and with a metropolitan, Orthodox metropolitan, and so on. And one day he said, the Orthodox metropolitan, Nestor Vornicescu was his name, and not a very nice person, to be fair. His dealings with the secret police are well known, and so on. So this guy came to the general and said, "General, I know you are a cultured person, you read many books, but if you have not read this book, you don't know anything." And the stupid jerk, who was the Orthodox metropolitan, heavy cooperator with the police and all that, people who has, somebody who has really paid a price for his cooperation, gave this guy a Bible. And this guy started reading the Bible. He said, "I was never in church in my life. I never read the Bible. I started reading the Bible, and I became a Christian. I started reading church fathers, and that changed my life completely.
Mm-hmm.
He finished his military career.
He became an Orthodox Christian, or
he became an Orthodox Christian. Yes, and he ended his military career as the rector of the Romanian Military Academy.
Mm.
And he formed many generations of officers.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
You know, what happened is that from this point on a regular basis, through phone calls, through emails or other means, he constantly sent me encouraging notes, Bible verses, a quotation from a church father. Less than a year ago, I had the opportunity visiting Romania again. And after 40 something years, 46, I guess, we could meet. And I call him my general. He says, okay, allow me to call you my pastor.
Wow, that is an amazing story, which shows, right, that even in those times of darkness, and this is what a lot of people in the West don't understand, is that somehow there was providence, grace, things happened, even human encounters, not to speak about culture, not to speak about art and religion.
Normality was possible. I mean, it was hell for sure from the point of view of freedom and all that, but we could be happy human beings.
Yeah,
but we could have good interactions, we could enjoy life.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that the other day when yesterday I was doing something on Dostoevsky, and I said, I mean, what did Russia or the Soviet Union produce during that time? Shostakovich, Tarkovsky, just two. You don't have anything in the West on a par with Shostakovich, in my opinion, in terms of composer. But then we raised the question whether what happened in the dire, maybe spiritual situation that the West finds itself in. Maybe we can have disagreements or agreements about it, but there was some a certain spiritual and intellectual fervor that happened, and you were part of it, definitely. When I didn't catch any of that. I was too young, but I think you were part of a very intense spiritual living there, right?
Yeah. In fact, I mean, when I became a Christian, I turned into a church activist, and I have to say to you, I checked every dot on the fundamentalist game. I became the pure fundamentalist Christian, reading the Bible literally. I was a dispensationalist. I was a Zionist. I mean, I checked all the heresies possible. I was very active in church. I was leading the young people in church, a student group. I was preaching. I was a board member. I've done everything except being a pastor. After 5 years of church activism, I was as cynical as one could be. Now, I still am to a certain extent, as you well know. That's part of my charm. But but after 5 years, nothing made sense to me. It's like I was a Christian, okay. I wasn't sorry that I made this decision, but church life was stinking. And then something happened. I met the Navigators. So one day and I remember, I'm not good with figures and dates, but this one I remember, 21st of August, 1977. 1977 is an important year, the Goma movement and all those things, and a few other things on top of that. So I met the Navigators, and they showed me a vision of the Christian life that made sense for the first time. I was hooked. And from that point on, I gave my life to this vision of discipling a few. But this sort of clashed with another engagement, which I had very soon after my conversion, which was as part of this called dissident movement started by Joseph Tson when he came back from Great Britain, and started writing documents in defense of Christian rights. And the whole younger generation, of which I was part in evangelicalism, was very enthusiastic and really backed Joseph in his effort of creating more external freedoms for Romanians, for Romanian evangelicals and beyond, to be fair. Only the Navigator movement was an underground movement, and the dissident movement was an overt confrontational movement. The two couldn't go together. So after about a year, the Navigators told me, you have to choose. We are not against your political involvement. It's your call. You can go there, but if you go there, you can't continue here, because you will endanger this underground movement of training lay leaders for the evangelical churches. And that was at a very critical time in my life, because in the spring of 1978, I was very close to Pavel Nicolescu and a few others, Aurel Popescu, Joseph Tson, and so on. But Pavel Nicolescu was creating at that time a committee called ILRC, the Committee for the Defense of Christian Rights, of freedom of conscience and freedom rights and so on. And I was going to be part of that when they were going to come open at the end of spring. But the Navigators told me, and I was very aware of that, that can't happen. I either choose this and renounce the Navigators, or the other way around. So I went and talked with Pavel, and Pavel told me, I have an advice for you. They have expelled me from the faculty of philosophy 2 weeks before I got my degree. I don't want this to happen to you. So you wait until you get your degree, and then you join us, but we'll have to go open. Now, the end of my studies was in October. They came open at the end of April or beginning of May. So I was not part of the announcement because I had to get my degree. That summer was the summer when I had to make a decision. And after many struggles in which God has used providentially a number of people, among which Father Vishki, Ferenc Vishki, reformed pastor in close to Oradea, who was my mentor during that period, I came to the conclusion that I have to choose discipleship over political commitment. But having said that and having decided that, I already had a thick file with secret police, and I continued to be followed by them. Because, the saying, God forgives, we don't forget. So that was a burden that I carried all my life. And, as I said, I had access and I could find in it, a lot of things that I have forgotten myself.
And what this important stage that followed after your decision to stick with the Navigators, and you did that, I presume, until 1989.
Yes, and that ended in 1990 because of a complicated thing. Basically, the Romanian Navigator group disbanded.
So I wanted to ask about what did you learn personally and theologically as a Christian from this involvement, right? Because it seems it helped you offset some of the cynicism that you developed through your activities in the church per se.
Yeah, I learned a few interesting things. First of all, I value highly my involvement with the dissident movement and some of the leaders of this. I got close to people like Joseph Tson and Pavel Nicolescu and Aurel Popescu, people whom I highly respect. Some of them, one of them Aura Popescu is with the Lord now, and the others are still alive and somewhat active, more or less, although they're not together anymore, which is a sad thing. But one of the things I learned is that that is a legitimate call that some people may have, to fight for freedom. And I love these people. I'm naturally drawn to them. I remember one of the things I did in my other life, latest lives I had with the navigators was with World Vision. But we'll talk about that later if we have time. I visited Vietnam, and I was talking there with church leaders, and especially unregistered church leaders. I met with registered church leaders also, but among these, I've seen some people who were, in temperament, very close to people like Pavel Nicolescu. And one of them especially, it's like I've seen Pavel and I say, I love naturally, instinctively, this kind of people. So I value this calling, and I think it's important.
But can you speak about the experience of the navigators, what you learned as a Christian in that?
Yeah, sure. Let me continue with this because it's connected with it. What I realized later on, reflecting on this, especially in the context of teaching about communism and post-communism from a Christian perspective after 89, was that what we were trying to accomplish through this dissident movement was a change of wineskins. I'm alluding to the biblical metaphor of new wineskins. We were trying to get new wineskins, new freedoms, access to the press, access to radio, television, publishing new books, having more people in the seminary, raising new buildings, and so on and so forth. The interesting thing is that we have accomplished very little of this with huge efforts and huge dangers. 89 came, and we got all these overnight. Mm-hmm. And we were not ready for almost any of these. Mm-hmm. So while we legitimately were seeking for these freedoms, we should have concentrated primarily, more importantly, on the new wine, on training leaders, on preparing for these freedoms. And, with the navigators, we did precisely that. We worked with a few in small groups. We try to help people develop their own gifts and callings and so on. I work mostly with students, men and women. People we have discipled in our discipleship ministry now are on 4 continents, many of them continuing to do what they learned doing, discipling others, preaching, doing Bible studies, teaching their children, or just being highly equipped professionals who do their job from a Christian perspective in many places in the world. So that was, I think, one of the most important things that we've learned during that period. For me, I became aware of 3 needs we have in the Christian community. We need theologians, we need thinkers, people who have the ability to see the big picture, people who are able to have the Bible in one hand, and I would add to that the Christian tradition, if you allow me to. So God's revelation understood historically, and an understanding, and the newspaper on the other, the understanding of reality and trying to make a bridge. This is the first calling. The second, we need pastors, because the people of God need pastoral care. They need somebody to confess to. They need somebody to guide them, to feed the flock, and so on, to equip the flock for the ministry, for the work of ministry, as the Apostle Paul says. But the third thing, the most important thing, and unfortunately the most neglected thing, is to equip the saints for the work of ministry, which is basically to concentrate on equipping the simple members, not the leaders, not the thinkers, the theologians, but people who are just members of the church, to be as articulated in their Christian faith as they are, ideally, supposedly, in their professional field. That is a call that is neglected even today in the Christian church. And that is something that we tried, at least in my discipleship ministry, we tried to do till the forthcoming.
And how, and you have these two perspectives, right? How did the evangelicals develop after the fall of communism, and what's the state as you see them from Glasgow, from Scotland, and you see, you have the privilege of seeing them from afar, and you've been part of the community. In the meanwhile, we'll talk, you've left the community, but I think you have the long view, if anyone has it. What's the...
Yeah. I have to say, I'm quite discouraged by what's happening in the evangelical community. We have no vision of the future. I'm not surprised that is the case, because we have lived for almost 50 years as slaves, you know, going back to the metaphor of Exodus. And as the Israelite slaves could not understand what a country where milk and honey flow and Canaan and all that, after living for centuries under oppression, the same way we couldn't understand what living under freedom is. We have, you know, put down freedom. We have tended to sell our freedom cheap. We concentrated on less important things like, you know, buildings. The communists didn't allow us to build, and now we build like crazy. And drach, we say in Romanian, you know. I mean, for goodness sake, and everybody did this. The Orthodox, the Catholics,
and right? Not too many hospitals or schools or...
No, absolutely. I mean, we started a few schools, but even those were religious schools. I don't think we need more religious schools. I don't believe in Christian schools. I don't know what that is, as I don't believe in Christian mathematics, for goodness sake. You know, I think what we need is for Christians to be salt and light in society, to be the leaven that from inside transforms things, not to try to impose Christian rules or create islands, Christian islands, as Ron Dreher, and we may disagree on this, is trying to promote with his false, distorted understanding of the Benedict approach. So I would like to see Christians present in society, not isolated. During communism, we took a Christ against culture approach. It was probably a kind of survival mechanism, and it worked to a certain extent. But when freedom came, we have many more options, and continuing with that isolationist or this effort of building a parallel universe is just nonsense, you know. So we didn't do well from this point of view. We lost some of the gifted people we had in the West. They went to study and never came back. Some who came back were pushed out of the educational system, you know. I mean, I'm a Langham scholar. I had the privilege of being supported by John Stott's Langham Scholarship Trust in my studies. There have been at least 10 Romanians who have obtained their doctorates in this process. I don't think there's more than 3 who are still teaching in Romanian evangelical educational systems. They were pushed out because the systems are controlled by evangelical dictators. People who learned how to run institutions dictatorially during communism, and that was the only paradigm that they know. They want to control everything. And of course, freedom of thought and academic freedom does not sit well with us. The result is we lost valuable people. They are teaching, you know, I mean, you did an interview with Adi Vidu. He was probably my most gifted student, but he couldn't fit the system. He had to go. And he does extraordinarily well, and he's not the only one.
Quick, now, since you raised the issue of Christians and cultures, and you mentioned the Benedict option. How do you, because my fear is that, and I think that this conversation in the West, current Western culture, which is heavily secularized, heavily anti-religious, militantly, I would say anti-religions. I would dare say that we live a situation of neo-paganism
Yeah, sure.
in the West, right? And so Christianity, in a way, is again a resistance movement to a certain degree.
Yeah. But I would say, Ari, I think we are back in the situation in the first century. So we can take lessons from there. I don't think that Paul would have followed the Benedict options.
Definitely.
He didn't.
Definitely.
I mean, of course, people were persecuted. They were killed, they were beheaded, they were crucified, and so on and so forth. But they continued to be in society. Not they didn't measure on political resistance. Some sought martyrdom at any cost, stupidly, I would say, because Jesus said, don't seek to be killed. If they persecute you here, go there. If you're okay, be brave, and so on and so forth. So I think the early church had a much more healthy attitude. My problem is that as Christians, we often take this kind of defensive attitude. We feel attacked. We start complaining, oh, nobody loves us, I mean, we've done that in post-communist countries immediately after the fall of communism. We started courting society to love us, and we were ready to make any compromise, to be loved by them. Jesus said, they hated me, they will hate you. Now, don't seek to be hated for the wrong reasons, okay? Don't be hated because you hate them, or swear at them, or you feel superior to them. If you're hated because you're Christian when everybody else is not, okay, take that as a medal, but don't become, this is what I find a lot in the conservative circles in America and in my own place. Everybody or most of the people in this camp feel like, oh, they don't love us, we have to defend ourselves.
I think I completely agree with you that the apologists, and I studied them quite a bit, actually when they debated the others, the Greco-Romans, tried to beat them at their own game, like becoming better philosophers, if you but then I have to trying to push back a little bit. And I completely agree with what you say, that the attitude, the Christians should not become, let's say, self-victimizing, or should not become bullies. But then how do you draw the difference between becoming completely accommodating and completely buying into the, let's say, we have this big issue with the new woke thing, right? Becoming woke, right? We're using the language and we're completely accommodating Christianity and making it, and we see that happening quite a bit among evangelicals as well, right? Because I totally agree with you. There is always something about resistance in Christianity. Right? Christianity, I was speaking with Jean-Luc Marion, and he always said, what do we expect? We always have to resist. It's never if we're accommodating, something is wrong. That's not.
Let me try to respond to this, okay?
Please.
I see, one of the things I teach from time to time is on history or church history and approaches to culture. And I think there are two basic approaches to culture. One is what I call the exclusive approach. Tertullians, if something is not born Christian, it's not legitimately Christian. And the other one, Justin Martyr's approach, is a more synthetic, or it could become syncretic, but I'm calling it synthetic, which basically says every good thing is from God. Every truth is God's truth. Something does not have to be born Christian to be legitimately accepted by Christian. And if something is born Christian, it is not necessarily compatible with Christianity, because Christians, like non-Christians, are a combination of good and bad. Yeah, they're not perfectly, when they accepted Christ in their life, they didn't become perfect overnight. And those who do not accept Christ as their savior, they are not totally bad, because they bear the image of Christ. So in virtue of this, they can create goodness, they can create beauty, they can create truth, and so on and so forth. So what I'm saying here basically is that we have to go about life with this kind of open attitude. Now, the second approach, which is the one I favor, the synthetic approach, I think is strengthened by when it is viewed from an incarnational perspective. Yeah, the Christianity, the church, has to be incarnated in the world as Christ was incarnated in the world. So Christ took upon himself human nature, fallen human nature. Otherwise, he couldn't heal it. Yeah, whatever is not assumed is not healed. The patristic adagium.
Yeah.
But he did not become sinful by doing this. Yeah, he resisted sin. So he was incarnated in our world in such a way that by uniting with us, he could show us an example, and at the same time be our first brother, and so on, in the faith. So what I'm saying by this is that accommodation is starting, probably like heresy, with a good intention. We want to communicate in a way that we are understood. Yeah, that's how liberalism started. Schleiermacher was a pietist. He was a guy who prayed. He was a guy who really had faith. What he tried to do was to recommend the gospel to the cultured despisers of the faith. Mm. I value this intention. The problem is that in this effort, he went beyond the limit and accommodated, and in the process affected the essence of the faith. So I think our call is to be part of this world, and at the same time remain not of this world, as Jesus was saying in John 17. And I'm saying this is not simple. This is not easy.
There's no recipe.
The easiest thing, is to isolate and create a parallel lifestyle. It's like, in Oradea, when Livio Allah came there, and he was confronted with the fact that, the board members of his church were getting drunk. Okay, they were drinking a little bit too much, and sometimes, pissing in the last bench in church, even. I've been told. And what was the solution he found? Very simple: teetotalism. Yeah. I'm sorry, this is stupid.
Yeah.
This is immature, and creates immature people and hypocrites. Because even today, leaders of that church and of that university where you studied and I taught are drinking. I've seen them. I drank with some of them because I'm not a teetotaler. So, this is not a solution. The solution is to be in the world, but not of the world. And that's not an easy way.
There is no recipe. There is no recipe.
And there is always a danger. But if you don't want to take the risk of danger, you'll not accomplish anything.
Yeah, I agree. Nevertheless, it's I don't know, in the academic environment, it's becoming, again, maybe we're reliving some of the things that you saw in communism, this moments where Christians have to be self-censored, practice self-censorship or hyper caution. Right. On the other
or just be ready to pay the price.
Exactly. On the other hand, Yes,
Yeah.
it is the sacrificial dimension, and martyr as a witness, not martyr as, in a way, the ultimate vocation of a Christian,
Yes.
right? Not to
Martyria first does not involve necessarily death.
right, right. Let me ask you. Then you had a long involvement with the Christian charitable organization among I think it's one of the biggest in the world, World Vision, right?
Yeah.
And you work
Second
for them,
after Caritas.
right? So you work for them around more than 10 years, right?
I was involved for 20 years with World Vision International,
Mhm.
starting in '95 as a board member of World Vision Romania, and I was in that situation for 13 years. But after 4 years of being in the board, I was invited to join the organization, and I was for 16 years director for faith and development for the Middle East and Eastern Europe region.
Mhm. Which you traveled widely, met very different and various communities. What are some of the insights and lessons, if you can
Oh,
even?
goodness. That was probably, besides my high school years and my theological formation period, of which we did not talk, one of the most formative periods of my life. I still remember my first visit to Jerusalem in the summer of 2000. As a former Zionist and former dispensationalist who was healed theoretically of that through my theological studies, but when I was faced with a real oppression that Palestinian people suffer in that place by the chosen people, I was crushed. I was never the same after the first week I spent in Jerusalem. And I went back there a number of times, and I love that place. And every time I came out of that place, I was smashed. I wasn't myself for days, sometimes no end, kind of. You know, I still carry that pain in me. Another experience I had, and that I was just, you know, visiting the demons of the past, if you want. Another experience that changed me a lot was the encounter with Islam. You know, because of that, because of the quality of Muslim people that I met, I just could not understand Islamophobia that is dominating Western Europe and America. I just can't understand that. I've often felt humiliated. No, I've not been humiliated. I felt humiliated by the love and the welcoming attitude of Muslims, which I've not seen in many of my Christian sisters and brothers. Another experience that really changed me completely, you know, I was always an ecumenist. I am a strong believer, and I think I have it in my blood. In my first discipleship group with the Navigators, I had Catholics, Lord's Army, Baptist, Brethren, Pentecostals. I've always worked with people interdenominationally. I am highly committed to the evangelical Orthodox dialogue. That's through my specialty, Orthodox ecclesiology, and so on and so forth. But in my work with World Vision, I have encountered the various faith communities with their good and bad. So no naivety. I know I've seen the ugly, but I've seen the beautiful. And I've been enriched beyond understanding through my encounter with Armenian Apostolic, with Georgian Orthodox, I mean, I was enriched to see in Mongolia the steps of the early Assyrian church who came there for the first time to as missionaries, you know, in before the year 1000. And then I've seen the young springing church. I met mostly with evangelicals, not with the Orthodox, but I was told that at the fall of communism in 1991 in Mongolia, there were only 4 Mongolian Christians in the world, probably evangelical Christians, they mean by that. When I was there, I've seen a vibrant church that doesn't care very much about labels. That has all sorts of dangers, I mean, because people were not bringing just their enthusiasm, but also sometimes their heresy and so on and so forth. But there was a vibrancy there. It was almost like going back to 20 centuries before and seeing the church growing, in the book of Acts, fascinating. Those things have enriched me in tremendous ways. So I could never be the same. I'm very grateful. And also seeing poverty, true poverty, utter poverty, and then the beauty that poor people empowered, encouraged, inspired by the Christian faith and a vision of the future can transform their own lives and their communities. That is something that will stay with me until beyond the grave.
And it is probable that the future of Christianity is not the West. You just have to look at the numbers.
No, absolutely.
You have to
the
look
way
at the numbers.
Has moved in the South and East.
Even the numbers for Protestantism. I was talking to Bob Yarborough about this. Less than 10% of Protestants live in the United States. And how many of those are the evangelicals, right? So it's a minor minority compared to the big picture. I tell that to my students all the time. Don't think that the world is going secular just because you're living in Chicago or New York. This is your bubble. This is your bubble. It's not true in other places of the world. But
true. The problem is that the financial power is still in the West. Publishing power is still in the West. And American evangelicalism, with all its toxic Trumpism and so on, it can still poison world evangelicalism through the power of money and the publishing. And that's a great concern that I have. And one of the things that encourages me is Langham scholarship, Langham literature, which tries to encourage writers from the majority world to create things in English and promote those things. But still, the majority of money is in the West, and the majority of books in English are in the West, and they can do a lot of harm, unfortunately. Coming back to the topic of secularism, which you brought here.
Excuse me. Yes, they can do harm, but then they can also do good, I think. Well, I mean,
if they are good, they can do good. And Langham scholarship is funded mostly from the West, and it produces good. So I'm saying everything that is born in the West is bad. Of course. I myself benefited from it tremendously. I could have not done a PhD if I had to pay for everything, the books and the studies and all that. So I'm really grateful. And I'm also one of those who are pleading for the church in the West and the church in the East or South working together, because we can all teach each other. This is the beauty of the body of Christ.
But sorry, you were gonna speak about something and I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. And I wanted to say something about secularism and secularity. I try to make a distinction between the two. I'm a strong believer in the need of secularity. For me, that is separation of church and state, radical separation of church and state. I believe that secularism, where it is successful, it is like an indictment of the church and of Christendom. Christians have abused their position of power for centuries, trying to impose their rules, their ethics, their principles on the world. That time is gone. Thanks be to God. For good, I believe, because Christendom was not a friend of Christianity. Popular cultural Christianity is not a friend of the gospel. When it's popular that you became a Christian, you're in danger, big danger. So I believe that I live in Scotland, probably one of the most secular places in the world. I think they've invented secularism. But when I look at John Knox, the stupid aggressiveness of this guy, the debauchery in it, moral debauchery in which he personally lived, and then the abuse of Catholics in this country. You know, I mean, Scotland could be the first atheistic country, Western country in the world as a result of that stupidity. And I still see it, you know, when the Orange Order are marching in the city and you know, ravaging everything Catholic they find in their way, when Rangers, Protestant fans, attack Catholic Celtic fans. Mm. That's still, you know, a result of this stupidity, religious stupidity. So secularism in Scotland is the result, the natural result, the natural consequence on the church messing up this society. And the Church of England, my own church, did the same in England. So I'm not surprised Britain is secular. Now, how do we as Christians, I mean, I try to continue to live as a Christian in Scotland, as you know, you try and in Chicago and others in other places. I don't think we should feel either oppressed or I don't know, put down or whatever. I think this is a chance. I repeat what I said. Our society, our context, pluralistic, in which Christians cannot pound the table, shout, impose their rules, very much like the first century. Mm-hmm. And we can learn a few things from there. Not idealizing. The first century, Christian century, was not ideal. They made many stupid mistakes, and it's enough to read the scripture to see that. But still, there is something there that tells us that this defensive kind of, I don't know, self-pity attitude that we often have in our society is not legitimate. They will not love us. But do you want to be loved by some of these people? To be fair, no, I don't want to. I don't want to. You know, I prefer to choose my friends and my enemies. I want to be hated by the right enemies. You know.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So, speaking about your ecumenical attitude, right? Which so you're in a way somehow pan-Christian, right? You believe that Christianity can be practiced from within a variety of traditions, be they Protestant, absolutely, Catholic, or Orthodox.
Absolutely. I'm saying the creed that says, I believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church.
So in a way that the church is invisible and disseminated among, yes, various religious groups.
Yes. I believe in a spiritual ecumenism. I don't believe in institutional ecumenism. I don't think the church will ever be one institution. I think from this point of view, Catholicism has learned the lesson of the Reformation, while Reformed churches didn't. You know, there is more variety within the Catholic Church today than there was in the entire Christian world at the time of the Reformation. They learned to keep it together. I mean, not comfortably. There's a lot of debate. I mean, look in the States at the bishops who hate the Pope and the Pope who loves them, but is firm with them, and he should be even firmer, to be fair. I say that as a Pope lover, as a Francis lover. Yeah, that's the church is one. The church is one, and Christians who believe in this one church, I think, can recognize each other. It's what you know, to use C.S. Lewis terms. You know, if you meet somebody who's been in Narnia, you'll recognize that person.
Yes, yeah. Along the margins of his term of a mere Christianity, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Not a dogmatic kind, not an ecclesiastic, whatever, denominational, but a broad a broad kind of Christianity, which
And
I believe is what Christ preached.
it's maybe appropriate to talk about your theological journey, because right, we talked a little bit about the beginnings, but then you studied theology, and then then you have undergone a second conversion, so to speak, from
evangelicalism to
evangelical
Anglicanism.
Christianity to the Anglican faith. Please.
Okay, let me begin, and I'll start with my conversion, because when I heard that voice saying you have to serve me, my understanding, my hermeneutics of that message was that I have to go and become a pastor, to go to the Baptist seminary in Bucharest, become a pastor. It's very interesting, the opposition I got to this idea from my family, but I could understand. They were brethren, so what do they know of pastors? Okay, brethren don't have pastors. Most of them don't. Some do, in Switzerland, for instance, but Swiss brethren are much more enlightened. And my Baptist church was against it, for goodness sake. I mean, why? Maybe they thought I'm an infiltrated brethren that tries to destroy the Baptist sect or whatever. I had no idea. But interestingly, even my mentors were against it. Now, one of them was brethren, so I could understand that. But one day I have received a letter that I keep like the holy relic, in which a man who was very influenced at my time, in my first years, strange guy, Danish, with connections with a royal family and so on. Weird theologically, and I'm aware on opposite positions, but a very saintly person who had a heart for the East, very pietistic, very Zionist, and of course I was a Zionist, so no complaint there at the time. This guy sent me a letter, a 3-page letter, in which basically I had kind of like a prophetic message about my life. Now he started saying by that, something that I easily discarded, like in Jesus' time, there were many theological schools in Jerusalem, but he did not send the apostles to any of them. Oh, I said, rubbish. Okay. But then, he started almost like speaking prophetically, saying, this is not God's plan in your life. He will bring at the right time, the right people, the right books, and the right environment, the right context, circumstance in your life. And from time to time, he will put you to test. If you'll take the test, he will open before you a large avenue of ministry. Now, Adi, this is the story of my life. And I can put my finger on a number of periods when this happened. We talked about World Vision, that was one of them. And there are more than that. At the end of the 3rd page on the back, he said, the Baptist seminary in Bucharest is no good. Now, we both know why. It was controlled by the secret police. They were selecting only those people they thought, would be obedient and so on. So I renounced the idea and I went on a different track. But at the end of, towards the end of the communist era, in fact, in '89, Joseph Son and a few others initiated this idea of creating an underground training program for evangelical leaders. After they realized that what the BE tried to do, BE is a consortium of various evangelical ministries, including Campus Crusade and Navigators and others, have tried to do, but they realized they cannot go deep enough. It became too populist. So they had to create a formal program. And they talked, Joseph and a few others, with the help of the Romanian Missionary Society UK, that was created for the purpose of this. They contacted Spurgeon College. The first attempt didn't go, so finally they went in a consortium with London Bible College at the time, London School of Theology now. And they started before '89 to to do an underground training program for creating, you know, a new generation of leaders in Romania. I was, because of my former involvement with a dissident movement, Joseph invited me to be part of this, and a number of my former colleagues in that were part of this. After '89, with you know, the program came in the open and continued. So until the summer of '93, we went through this as distance learning program. Yeah, teachers were coming every 6 weeks. They would teach a course. They would leave some books. They would give us some essays to write, and we would read the books, have another teacher, and so on for 3.5 years. At the end of that, in June of '93, a number of people in the program, about 20, were invited to to go to London to finalize their studies. For me, this program was absolutely enlightening. You know, I mean, I did not go into studying theology in '73. And I started doing that, and I ended it in '93. So sort of, you know, 20 years later, at another age, a different level of maturity, and after going through a set of experiences in life. So it was extremely beneficial. It really, you know, changed my whole understanding of things, and I got depth and richness and all that. I had also the privilege of having a very strong relationship with Graham McFarlane, who was the coordinator of this program, who became later on my supervisor for my master's degree and for my PhD. So it was a very enriching time. But from the beginning, I told Graham that I'm not going to go to England. You know, I'm at a stage in my life when I can't do this. You know, I can't leave my children and so on. I can't take them with them, of course, it's too expensive and so on. And in fact, I dropped the idea. But one day, Graham took me on a walk, and he said, I think you have to understand how the system works. And I think you can do it. So he showed me, he convinced me basically that, you know, the program contains 3 terms of 8 weeks. At the end of each of these terms, there is a month break. You can go home, be with your wife, spend time with your children, and so on and so forth. I said yes. 1 month later, he came back to me and said, I have a different offer. He said, 4 of you, we want to invite, and that was Benny Frago, Adi Pastor, Titi Bulzan, and myself. He said, we want to invite you, the 4 of you, to go directly to the master's degree, because we think you have fulfilled the requirements for the degree, can go directly to the master's. But there is a catch. There is a 4th term. So I said, Graham, I gave you 1 finger, and now you want to take my whole hand. He said, hold it. There is a solution. He said, the 4th term is the writing term. So if you choose a Romanian topic, you can do your research in Romania and come to hand the paper here. So that's how I got in the theological training. And in '93, '94, I was in the master's program. At the end of it, I wrote a paper on the place of scripture in the Orthodox tradition. I registered for the PhD. I came to the country and taught theology for 5 years. And then I joined World Vision. And because when you've seen me in Oradea, I was there from time to time because I was teaching a modular course. I continued to live in Iași. So I was coming once a month for a week or 10 days and so on, because I was also in charge of research at the university and so on. And then, you know, I left in 98, sorry. I couldn't bear the oppressive attitude atmosphere in the institute. And for a year, I taught religious education in Richard Wurmbrand school in Yash, a school that I started with some friends. And then in 99, I joined World Vision. And I traveled like crazy, half of my time at least. So it took me 10 years to finish my doctorate, but I have defended it in 2004, and I got my degree, my degree in 2005. I changed tremendously during that time, and I became, in time, more liturgical, more sacramental, more historically rooted than an evangelical would ever be. So at a certain point, I realized I can't stand hearing in evangelical churches, this is not my body. This is not my blood. Yeah, symbolizes, represents, that, thanks a lot.
The warning, right? The warning.
You have the right to believe whatever you believe, but I can't stand this. I need to move. Yeah. So about 12 years ago, I was confirmed in the Anglican Communion in the Baptist Church, in the Anglican Church in Bucharest. But man, it had to be with a story. I had to be, in Anglicanism, you can be confirmed only by a bishop. But the Bishop of Europe is in Gibraltar. He comes very rarely to visit churches in his huge bishopric. So there was a plan for the Bishop of Gibraltar to come to visit Bucharest, but quite unlikely. Then the priest left, and in his stead came a suffragan bishop who was retired. That was my chance. So I came in contact with him, we arranged a date, and I showed up, and the guy forgot. He was old after all, He forgot that we decided, said, oh, I don't have the liturgy. I said, I have it. I printed it.
So you brought it.
So I was confirmed on that Sunday in an adventurous context.
Wow. But it's very interesting. And when I heard about it, the first thing I wondered is, why didn't you convert into the Orthodox Church? So that would be my...
I don't have the stuff. Orthodox people love, the mildew, they love everything old, like old language, old liturgy. And I don't understand, I don't have the stuff that makes an Orthodox. Why should a 4th, 5th century liturgy be holier than a 20th century liturgy? No idea. I've been changed. I blame Dumitru Stăniloae, a theologian I studied for my PhD, for turning Anglican. But that's as far as I can go. I don't, I have amazing Orthodox friends. I love them. Father Stelian Tofana became my partner in Evangelical Orthodox Dialogue after we met in 1995 in the first research conference at the Emmanuel in Oradea. And we are buddies. We cooperated for 10 years in World Vision when he was chaplain of the financial arm of the microcredit arm of that. And we've done amazing things together. But I'm not an Orthodox, as he is not an evangelical. And to be fair, Adi, I want to add something very important here. I'm a border person. I prefer to negotiate traffic between the two traditions rather than take sides. I'm a post-evangelical, post-conservative Christian. Evangelicals who know me will never recognize me as one of their own. If I join the Orthodox, I will always be suspect. I prefer to stay at the border. And there's a risk, of course, of being shot from both sides, but that's the story of my life. So nothing new about it.
And it's a story of a lot of courage and living up to the truth, right? Not making the wrong compromises.
Yeah, I have a good training during communism, so I have to be consistent.
What I know you've been involved also with the high school in Yash, Richard Wurmbrand. You were part of, and it's one of the probably most successful projects of in terms of education that the evangelicals have.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, it was a dream. You know, we started. We started in 1990, immediately after the fall of communism, together with Liliana Romaniuk, who became the director of the school. We started our efforts to create a school. And then I went to visit Richard Wurmbrand and Paulo Zerdes to ask his permission to name the school after him. We were dreaming of creating a school based on Christian principles, not a Christian school. I don't believe in Christian schools. So that's why we decided to apply the state curriculum, but to teach it from a Christian perspective, together a group of teachers who were not only evangelicals. It wasn't supposed to be an evangelical school. I taught the religious education there for 1 year, but I did not teach the evangelical religion. I taught Christianity from an ecumenical perspective. So, but, you know, what happened in time is that we became dependent and on a very limited set of resources. Iași is probably the poorest large city in Romania. Evangelicals are not the most educated people. Many of them are somewhat poor, so they couldn't afford to pay all the tuition, all the cost. So we had to fundraise. You know, for years, I was the chair of the board. I had to go with Liliana sometimes on my own, or she would go on her own to do fundraising in the States. So we became in time dependent on a few sources, and those were based in Birmingham, Alabama. You know, I mean, you know what I mean? Fundamentalist, Southern Baptist or Baptistic Bible Belt in the States. And at a certain point, they started, you know, I mean, I learned that from Richard Wurmbrand, you know, the definition of the golden rule is that who has the gold makes the rules. And they started, and they wanted to use the school to proselytize. You know, I mean, we had not just evangelical students, but also Orthodox. Of course, evangelicals are a minority, yes, still are. And of course, because they were paying for it, they wanted to take the scalps of these Orthodox parents. And I said, over my dead body. And they said yes. So I had to leave. And the school turned into an evangelical school. It is good. It's large. It is led by somebody who can satisfy the American funders. It's still far from what myself and Liliana have dreamed. But it's a good school.
It's a good school. Still doing what is possible. Before we end, I just wanted to ask you to say a few, I don't know, words of advice, some, you know, words of wisdom to, you know, possible students, to people who might listen to this. I mean, usually I do these interviews for students, for young people. Right?
Oh, let me say one thing. Words of wisdom I don't have. I should be a wise man by now, but, you know, I mean, you know, I thought that, you know, wisdom will come with white hair. No, white hair comes alone. So no words of wisdom, but I want to say something that has been extremely important for me. The most important thing for my life was by God's providence, you know, I had the chance of being in contact for longer or shorter periods of time with wise mentors. Surrounding oneself with wise mentors is the key of success in life. And I know that many educational methods are putting distance, and we use online methods and so on. You know, when my grandson has just started studying criminology in Aberdeen. And when he went there, I told him, you know, look for a person you like. Try to get close to that person. The benefit you'll get from this is tremendous, because you're not there just to learn stuff. You find that stuff in libraries or on the internet. What you are there to is to share the lives of people that could become models in your life. I strongly believe that you know, the old trusted method of discipleship, of having a few around you, or being yourself around somebody who is wiser, more seasoned, somebody who is authentic, not somebody who pretends to be what he or she is not. And having a variety of these in life is the secret for a fulfilled life. Don't seek happiness. I don't believe in this, that the purpose of life is happiness. I think that's a selfish, stupid game. I know it's the American game, but I don't believe in the American dream. I'm sorry, I'm profoundly European. I believe fulfillment in life comes when you are consistently yourself, but not, you know, I mean, your natural self. I don't believe in the natural self. The natural self is wild. You're not a beast. I believe that you are called to be something, that in God's mind, you're called to be something, and you become that something when you're mirrored with somebody who is wiser, who is richer, who is broader than you are, and you so start imitating. Paul says, be imitators of me as I am imitator of Christ. Now, that's, and he talks there, basically it's about mirroring. It's not about becoming a puppet or becoming a clown. It's about looking yourself in the eyes of the other, learning where you need to change, and then for a while you learn by imitation. You know, I told you my access to culture was through snobbishry, for goodness sake. Could you imagine a worse way? You know, I mean, you have to take the road you have. You may not be able to be close to, I don't know, Beethoven. Of course, he's dead, so you can only use illegal means to get in contact with him. But if you want to become a musician, you will find people who you can. One of the greatest musicians these days is Cristian Măcelaru, a Romanian who couldn't pursue a decent musical career in Romania. He could go to the States. Even in the States, he could find good mentors. And now he is one of the most renowned orchestra directors. And he is the head of the National Orchestra of France, for goodness sake. And recently named the director of the Georgianescu Festival. So it is possible.
But he was also helped by people in the Bible Belt. I think the first.
Absolutely. There's goodness even in the Bible Belt. Lord have mercy on us.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Darius.
You're welcome, and thank you for this opportunity. I hope I hope I have destabilized a few.
In a good way.
Sometimes we need to be taken off our illusionary balance. You know, I have an American friend I disagree with him theologically totally. He's a dispensationalist. He studied in Dallas, whatever. He's a fun guy. I love him. He told me once, I don't believe in balance. He said, dead persons are balanced person. I never learned anything from balanced people. So I don't want to be a balanced person. I want to make you think.
Yeah.
And if I accomplished a little bit, then I'm happy.
Yeah. Amen to that. Yeah.